The Silent Observer, Master Human Behavior and Read People Without Saying a Word, published by Limitless Audiobook. Introduction. Every conversation carries two stories, the one spoken aloud and the one quietly unfolding beneath the surface. The people who understand this hidden layer rarely have to guess what others are thinking or feeling. They notice the hesitation before an answer, the confidence behind a smile, the tension hidden in relaxed posture, and the subtle habits that reveal character long before words ever do. Their greatest strength is not that they speak better than everyone else, it is that they observe better. The ability to read people is not a mysterious talent reserved for psychologists, detectives, or negotiators. It is a practical skill that anyone can develop with patience, curiosity, and disciplined attention. Once you learn where to look, human behavior begins to make sense in ways you may have never imagined. Actions become meaningful, patterns become visible, and silence becomes filled with information. In this audiobook, we will explore the hidden language of human behavior and learn how to understand people without relying solely on what they say. Together, we will discover how to notice subtle signals, recognize emotional patterns, uncover hidden motivations, distinguish confidence from performance, and understand relationships through careful observation rather than quick assumptions. More importantly, you will learn how to observe with wisdom and compassion instead of judgment. By the end of this journey, you will not simply become better at reading other people. You will become calmer in conversations, wiser in your decisions, stronger in your relationships, and more aware of yourself. Every interaction will become an opportunity to learn something valuable about human nature. The world has always been speaking in a silent language. Now it is time to learn how to truly see it. Chapter 1. Slow down until people begin to reveal themselves. Observation begins long before you learn how to read body language or interpret facial expressions. It begins with a decision to slow your mind. Many people move through conversations with their attention already occupied. They are planning what to say next, defending their opinions, checking their phones, or rushing toward the next task. When your mind is always racing ahead, you stop noticing what is happening right in front of you. The greatest observers are not necessarily the smartest people in the room. They are simply the ones who give their full attention to the present moment. Imagine walking through a familiar neighborhood every day. At first, it feels ordinary, but one morning you decide to slow your pace. Suddenly, you notice flowers blooming beside a house you've passed hundreds of times. You hear birds that were always singing but somehow escaped your attention. You recognize the faces of neighbors instead of seeing them as part of the background. The neighborhood did not change. Your awareness did. Human behavior works the same way. People constantly reveal pieces of themselves, but those details remain invisible to anyone moving too quickly to notice. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that observation means staring. It doesn't. True observation is quiet, relaxed, and respectful. It doesn't make others uncomfortable because it isn't intrusive. Instead, it comes from genuine curiosity. You are not trying to catch someone doing something wrong. You are simply allowing yourself to notice what is already there. This shift in attitude changes everything. Instead of looking for flaws, you begin looking for understanding. To become a silent observer, you must replace assumptions with questions. When someone seems impatient, resist the urge to label them as rude. Ask yourself what else could explain their behavior. Perhaps they are carrying stress from work. Maybe they received difficult news before they arrived. Perhaps they are simply worried about someone they love. Observation is strongest when it is paired with humility. The moment you assume you know everything about a person, you stop learning about them. Another habit worth developing is learning to be comfortable with silence. Many people rush to fill every quiet moment with words because silence feels awkward. Yet silence often reveals more than conversation. During a pause, people relax their guard. Their expressions soften, their posture changes, and their natural behavior begins to appear. If you immediately interrupt every quiet moment, you miss these valuable clues. Allow conversations to breathe. Give people room to think before they respond. Often their second answer tells you far more than their first. Slowing down also means resisting the temptation to react immediately. Someone says something that surprises you, disappoints you, or even offends you. Your first instinct may be to answer without thinking. Instead, pause. Observe not only the other person, but also yourself. Notice your own emotional reaction before expressing it. This simple habit makes you both a better observer and a wiser communicator. When you control your reactions, you create space to understand instead of simply responding. Patience is another quality that separates skilled observers from everyone else. Human behavior rarely reveals itself all at once. People often show different sides of themselves depending on the situation, the people around them, or the pressure they are experiencing. A single conversation cannot define someone's character. Real understanding grows through repeated observation over time. Like putting together pieces of a puzzle, every interaction adds another piece until the full picture becomes clear. As you begin practicing these ideas, don't expect dramatic discoveries overnight. Instead, pay attention to small details. Notice how people enter a room. Observe whether they listen carefully or constantly interrupt. Watch how they treat someone who cannot offer them anything in return. Pay attention to whether their actions consistently match their words. These small observations may seem insignificant by themselves, but together they tell a remarkably accurate story. From this moment forward, challenge yourself to become less hurried and more present. Walk into every conversation with the goal of learning rather than proving. Listen without preparing your next sentence. Watch without judging. Notice without rushing to conclusions. As your attention becomes calmer, your understanding will become deeper. And before long, you will realize something remarkable. People have been telling you who they are all along. You simply learned to slow down long enough to see it. Chapter 2. See the invisible messages hidden in every movement. Every person is constantly communicating, even when they never say a single word. Long before someone introduces themselves, their body has already shared dozens of small messages. The way they walk into a room, where they choose to stand, how they move their hands, and even how they hold their shoulders all create an impression. The mistake many people make is looking for one magical signal that reveals everything. Human behavior doesn't work that way. One crossed arm does not always mean defensiveness. One smile does not always mean happiness. The real skill is learning to see the complete picture instead of chasing individual clues. Think of body language as a sentence instead of a single word. A single word can have many meanings depending on the rest of the sentence. The same is true for human movement. Someone may avoid eye contact because they are shy, tired, thoughtful, or simply distracted. Another person may maintain constant eye contact because they are confident or because they are trying too hard to appear confident. That is why careful observers never rush to conclusions. They gather several signals before forming an opinion. Begin by noticing posture. It is one of the first things people reveal without realizing it. A person who stands comfortably with relaxed shoulders often projects a different emotional state than someone whose shoulders remain tight and raised throughout a conversation. But posture should never be judged in isolation. Someone carrying physical pain may appear tense even while feeling perfectly calm. Someone who just finished a long day may slouch from exhaustion rather than a lack of confidence. Always ask yourself what other explanations might exist before deciding what a posture means. Next, pay attention to movement. Some people move with steady, deliberate actions. Others constantly shift their weight, tap their fingers, adjust their clothing, or glance around the room. These movements are not necessarily signs of nervousness. They may simply reflect a person's natural energy level. This is why experienced observers look for changes rather than habits. If someone who normally sits calmly suddenly begins fidgeting during one particular topic, that change deserves attention. Behavior often becomes meaningful when it changes from a person's usual pattern. Facial expressions also tell a story, but not because every expression has one fixed meaning. Instead, expressions reveal emotional transitions. A smile that appears naturally and gradually feels different from one that appears instantly and disappears just as quickly. Eyes often reveal interest before the mouth does. Eyebrows may lift for a fraction of a second when someone hears unexpected news. These tiny moments are easy to miss if your attention keeps drifting toward your own thoughts. The quieter your mind becomes, the more clearly you notice these subtle changes. Your observation should also include how people use space. Some individuals naturally stand close because they enjoy connection. Others prefer more distance because it helps them feel comfortable. Neither choice is right or wrong. What matters is consistency. If someone suddenly steps backward during a conversation, they may be reacting to something that made them uncomfortable. If they gradually move closer, they may be feeling more relaxed and engaged. Space often reflects emotional comfort long before anyone says how they feel. Hand gestures deserve attention as well. Hands often move naturally when people feel comfortable explaining something they genuinely understand. Under stress, those movements may become smaller, quicker, or disappear altogether. Again, avoid turning this into a rigid rule. Every person has unique habits. The goal is not to memorize dozens of body language meanings. The goal is to notice when behavior changes in a meaningful way. Consider the experience of Jordan Mercer, an air traffic controller who had recently transferred to one of the busiest airports in the country. The new environment demanded constant focus, and the pressure affected everyone on his team. During his first week, Jordan noticed that one experienced co-worker answered every question politely and confidently. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but Jordan also observed that before each shift briefing, the co-worker quietly rubbed the back of his neck, avoided looking toward one particular display screen, and took noticeably deeper breaths whenever certain flight routes were discussed. Jordan didn't assume weakness or incompetence. Instead, he simply recognized that something was different. After a private conversation, the co-worker admitted he had recently experienced a difficult incident that had shaken his confidence. Because Jordan paid attention to several small behaviors instead of one isolated gesture, he approached the situation with understanding instead of judgment. That conversation strengthened their trust and helped the team support one another more effectively. This story reminds us that observation is not about exposing people, it is about understanding them. The purpose of noticing hidden signals is never to gain power over someone, it is to respond with greater wisdom, patience, and empathy. When you see beyond the surface, your conversations become more thoughtful because you stop reacting only to words. As you move through your day, begin practicing one simple exercise. Instead of immediately focusing on what people are saying, spend a few quiet seconds noticing how they are saying it with their movements. Observe how they enter a room. Notice whether their posture changes during different conversations. Watch how their expressions shift when certain topics arise. Don't label or judge, simply collect information. Over time, your mind will naturally begin connecting these observations into meaningful patterns. The invisible messages hidden in every movement have always been there. The difference is that now you are learning to see them. And once your eyes become trained to notice the complete picture instead of isolated moments, people will begin revealing far more than they ever intended to say aloud. Chapter 3. Hear the emotions people never put into words. Words tell you what a person has decided to say. Their voice often tells you what they are actually feeling. That is why becoming a better observer means learning to listen with more than your ears. You are not just listening for information. You are listening for emotion, certainty, hesitation, enthusiasm, and doubt. Every voice carries a hidden layer beneath the message itself, and once you begin paying attention to it, conversations become far more meaningful. Think about the difference between someone saying, "I'm fine," with a warm, relaxed voice, and someone saying the exact same words in a flat, tired tone. The sentence hasn't changed, but the meaning has. Most misunderstandings happen because people focus only on vocabulary while ignoring delivery. Human beings naturally communicate emotion through the way they speak. Sometimes they do it intentionally, but often they don't even realize they are doing it. One of the easiest things to notice is pace. Some people speak quickly because they are naturally energetic. Others naturally speak more slowly because they enjoy thinking before responding. Neither style tells you much on its own. What becomes interesting is when someone's normal rhythm changes. A person who usually speaks confidently may suddenly slow down when discussing a sensitive topic. Someone who normally chooses their words carefully may begin talking rapidly when they become excited or anxious. The change matters more than the speed itself. Pay attention to pauses as well. Silence inside a conversation is rarely empty. A pause can mean someone is searching for the right words. It can mean they are deciding how much they want to reveal. It can signal surprise, uncertainty, or careful reflection. Sometimes a pause simply shows respect because the person wants to answer thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. If you become uncomfortable every time silence appears, you may interrupt before the other person has shared what truly matters. The volume of someone's voice can also reveal subtle emotional shifts. A naturally soft-spoken person does not necessarily lack confidence, just as a loud voice does not automatically signal strength. But if someone suddenly lowers their voice while discussing a particular subject, your curiosity should grow. Likewise, if someone's voice becomes unusually loud during a disagreement, it may reflect rising emotion rather than stronger logic. Strong feelings often seek greater volume, while quiet confidence rarely needs to compete. Another clue hides in emphasis. Listen carefully to the words people choose to stress. Imagine someone saying, "I never said that," and then saying, "I never said that." The emphasis changes the meaning completely. The first version may deny the action. The second may suggest that someone else said it instead. Tiny changes in emphasis reveal where a person's attention and emotions naturally settle. Skilled observers notice these details without making dramatic assumptions. Hesitation can also be valuable, but it should never be treated as proof of dishonesty. People hesitate for countless reasons. They may be nervous, trying to remember something accurately, afraid of being misunderstood, or simply choosing their words with care. Assuming that every hesitation is a lie is one of the quickest ways to misjudge people. Instead, combine vocal clues with everything else you have observed. The voice is one piece of the puzzle, not the entire picture. Notice emotional consistency between the voice and the message. Imagine someone receiving wonderful news while speaking in a dull, emotionless tone. Or imagine someone claiming not to be upset while every word comes out tense and strained. These moments deserve attention, not because they expose deception, but because they suggest an emotional conflict. Sometimes people are trying to convince themselves as much as they are trying to convince you. Their voice quietly reveals the struggle their words attempt to hide. Listening deeply also requires patience. Too often, people hear only enough to prepare their own response. While the other person is still talking, their mind is already building arguments, advice, or stories about themselves. In doing so, they miss the emotional message completely. If you truly want to understand people, let them finish. Resist the urge to interrupt. Give their words room to breathe. The final sentence someone speaks often carries far more honesty than the first. There is another habit that separates excellent listeners from average ones. They notice what people repeatedly return to. During a conversation, certain topics naturally pull a person's attention. They may repeatedly mention their family, their work, a recent disappointment, or a future goal. Listen for these patterns. The subjects people revisit usually point toward what occupies their thoughts long after the conversation ends. Without asking direct questions, you begin to understand what matters most to them. Your own voice deserves observation too. If you hope to understand others, become aware of how you sound when you are excited, frustrated, uncertain, or completely relaxed. The better you recognize your own vocal habits, the easier it becomes to recognize similar patterns in others. Self-awareness strengthens observation because it teaches you the difference between objective listening and personal projection. From now on, challenge yourself to hear conversations differently. Listen beyond the sentences. Notice the rhythm, the pauses, the emphasis, the confidence, and the uncertainty. Allow your attention to settle on both the message and the emotion behind it. Over time, you will discover that people rarely hide everything they feel. More often, their voice quietly carries the truth, waiting for someone patient enough to hear it. Chapter 4. Stop chasing moments and start reading patterns. One conversation can be misleading. One good day can create a false impression, and one bad day can do the same. That is why the silent observer never rushes to define a person based on a single moment. Human beings are far too complex to be understood through one interaction. A person who seems cheerful today may be carrying a heavy burden tomorrow. Someone who appears impatient this morning may simply have had a sleepless night. If you want to understand people accurately, stop collecting isolated moments and start looking for patterns. Think of the weather. You wouldn't decide that a city has a hot climate because one afternoon happened to be sunny. You would look at the weather over weeks, months, and seasons before reaching that conclusion. Human behavior deserves the same patience. A single action is like one day's weather. Patterns are the climate. Patterns reveal what is normal, dependable, and deeply rooted in a person's character. One of the first habits to develop is identifying a person's baseline. A baseline is simply the way someone normally behaves when they are relaxed and comfortable. Every person has one. Some naturally smile often. Others speak quietly. Some use expressive hand gestures, while others barely move at all. If you don't know someone's normal behavior, it becomes very easy to misunderstand them. You may mistake personality for emotion or habit for intention. For example, imagine meeting someone who rarely makes direct eye contact. If you assume that avoiding eye contact always means nervousness or dishonesty, you could completely misread them. But after spending time with that person, you realize they interact the same way with everyone. It isn't a sign of discomfort at all. It's simply part of their natural communication style. Observation becomes more accurate when you compare people to themselves rather than comparing everyone to the same standard. Patterns also reveal consistency, and consistency is one of the strongest indicators of character. Anyone can be generous once. Anyone can appear calm during a pleasant conversation. Anyone can seem confident when everything is going well. Character becomes visible when similar situations produce similar responses over time. Does a person keep their promises even when it's inconvenient? Do they treat people with respect regardless of status? Do they stay composed under pressure, or does their behavior change dramatically? These repeated choices tell a far more reliable story than isolated actions ever could. This doesn't mean people never change. In fact, meaningful changes are often important signals. When someone's usual behavior shifts noticeably and stays different, your attention should naturally increase. Perhaps the normally energetic coworker becomes unusually quiet for several weeks. Maybe the dependable friend begins forgetting commitments they have always honored. A lasting change in someone's pattern often points to a change in their life. Instead of criticizing the behavior, become curious about its cause. Consider Rebecca Sloan, a museum curator preparing for the largest exhibition of her career. She depended on dozens of volunteers to help organize priceless collections before the opening. One volunteer stood out because he was always polite, punctual, and eager to help. On paper, he seemed like the perfect team member. But Rebecca noticed something that others overlooked. Whenever responsibilities involved working closely with the rest of the team, he quietly found reasons to work alone. At first, she ignored it because each excuse sounded reasonable. Then she realized the same pattern appeared week after week. Rather than assuming he was unfriendly, she invited him to talk privately. He admitted that he had recently lost confidence after making a mistake at a previous volunteer position and feared disappointing people again. Rebecca adjusted his responsibilities gradually, giving him opportunities to rebuild trust in himself. Within weeks, his confidence returned, and he became one of the strongest members of the team. The breakthrough happened because she noticed a recurring pattern instead of judging isolated moments. Patterns are equally valuable when evaluating yourself. You may believe you are patient because you remained calm during one difficult conversation. But what happens over several months? How do you consistently respond when you are tired, stressed, or under pressure? The same observation skills that help you understand others can help you grow as a person. Your habits reveal your strengths more honestly than your intentions do. As you observe people, avoid the temptation to keep a mental scorecard of their mistakes. The purpose of recognizing patterns is not to collect evidence against someone. It is to understand who they truly are. Look for patterns of kindness, reliability, curiosity, resilience, and integrity, just as carefully as you notice patterns of impatience or avoidance. The more balanced your observations become, the more accurate your understanding will be. Another important lesson is that patterns often appear in small, ordinary situations rather than dramatic ones. Watch how someone reacts when plans unexpectedly change. Notice whether they consistently arrive prepared or always seem rushed. Pay attention to whether they ask thoughtful questions or spend most conversations talking about themselves. These everyday behaviors repeat far more often than major life events, making them excellent windows into character. From this point forward, resist the urge to label people after your first impression. Let time become your teacher. Observe how behavior repeats, evolves, and responds to different circumstances. The more patiently you collect these patterns, the less likely you are to misunderstand others. Eventually, you'll discover that people rarely reveal who they are in one unforgettable moment. More often, they reveal themselves through the quiet repetition of ordinary days. Chapter 5. Catch the feelings that slip past every mask. Every person wears a mask from time to time. Sometimes it is a smile offered out of politeness. Sometimes it is confidence displayed to hide uncertainty. Other times it is calmness covering disappointment or fear. These masks are not always dishonest. In many situations, they help people move through daily life without placing every emotion on display. But no mask is perfect. Feelings have a way of escaping through small moments that most people never notice. As a silent observer, your goal is not to expose those moments. Your goal is to understand them with compassion. One of the biggest misconceptions about emotions is that they can be completely hidden. In reality, emotions constantly influence the body, the voice, and behavior. A person may choose careful words, but their shoulders may tighten. They may smile while their eyes lose energy. They may insist that everything is fine, yet their patience disappears over small inconveniences. These subtle differences often tell you that something deeper is happening beneath the surface. The key is to avoid treating every emotional clue as a secret waiting to be uncovered. Human behavior is rarely that simple. A tired person may look sad. Someone dealing with physical pain may appear irritated. A quiet person may simply enjoy silence rather than feel uncomfortable. Observation requires curiosity, not certainty. Instead of saying, "I know exactly how they feel," train yourself to think, something may be affecting them. That small change in thinking keeps you open to learning instead of closing the door with assumptions. One useful habit is noticing emotional contrast. Contrast appears when a person's outward behavior does not fully match the situation. Imagine someone receiving good news, yet responding with only a brief smile before becoming quiet again, or someone laughing with a group while their attention repeatedly drifts elsewhere. These moments do not automatically reveal the reason behind the emotion, but they suggest that another feeling may be competing for attention. The observer notices the contrast without immediately trying to explain it. Stress often creates these emotional contrasts. Under pressure, people naturally become less able to control the small signals they usually manage with ease. Their breathing may become shallower, their responses may become shorter, they may lose patience more quickly, or struggle to concentrate on simple conversations. Some people become unusually talkative when stressed, while others withdraw into silence. Neither reaction is universal. What matters is recognizing how stress changes each individual from their normal behavior. Another valuable skill is learning to recognize forced emotions. Genuine emotions tend to appear naturally and disappear naturally. Forced emotions often arrive too quickly or stay longer than they should. Think about someone who laughs loudly at every comment, even when nothing is particularly funny, or someone who smiles continuously during a serious discussion. These behaviors do not necessarily indicate deception. They may simply be attempts to reduce tension or create comfort. People often use exaggerated emotions as a shield when they don't know how else to respond. Pay attention to recovery time as well. Emotions leave traces. After someone experiences surprise, disappointment, embarrassment, or excitement, it usually takes a little while for their behavior to return to normal. If a person's expression changes dramatically for just a moment before settling back into calmness, that brief shift may reveal an emotion they did not intend to show. These moments are often small, but they remind us that emotions move naturally through people, even when they try to control them. At the same time, remember that your own emotions influence what you observe. If you are angry, you are more likely to notice signs of disrespect. If you are insecure, you may interpret neutral behavior as rejection. If you expect dishonesty, you may begin seeing it everywhere. Becoming a skilled observer means learning to separate your emotional state from the other person's behavior. This is one of the hardest disciplines to master because it requires honest self-awareness. Empathy plays an important role here. Observation without empathy easily becomes criticism. You begin collecting evidence against people instead of understanding them. But when empathy guides your observation, everything changes. You stop asking, "What's wrong with this person?" and start asking, "What might this person be carrying that I cannot see?" That question transforms your relationships because it replaces judgment with compassion. Think about how often people silently fight battles that never appear in conversation. Someone may be worried about a loved one. Another may be facing financial pressure. Someone else may be questioning their future while pretending everything is under control. You rarely know the full story. Yet by paying attention to emotional clues with kindness rather than suspicion, you become someone who responds thoughtfully instead of reacting carelessly. There is another important lesson to remember. Not every hidden emotion needs to be discussed. Sometimes the greatest act of understanding is simply offering patience. You don't have to point out every hesitation you notice or every shift in expression you observe. In fact, doing so can make people feel exposed rather than understood. Silent observation is powerful because it allows you to adjust your own behavior without forcing others to explain themselves before they are ready. As your observation skills continue to grow, you'll begin noticing emotions that once escaped your attention. You'll recognize quiet disappointment behind polite words, genuine excitement behind reserved personalities, and hidden exhaustion beneath practiced confidence. But never forget why you're developing this skill. It is not to become better at reading weaknesses. It is to become better at understanding human beings. And when understanding becomes your goal, every conversation becomes gentler, every relationship becomes stronger, and every person you meet becomes someone you approach with greater wisdom and care. Chapter 6. Find the need driving every human decision. Every action begins with a reason, even if that reason is invisible. People rarely wake up with the goal of being difficult, impatient, distant, or demanding. More often, their behavior grows from a need they are trying to satisfy. Sometimes they are seeking security. Sometimes they want recognition. Sometimes they are protecting themselves from disappointment. If you only watch what people do, you will understand very little. But if you begin asking what need might be driving their behavior, your understanding of human nature will become much deeper. Think about a child who constantly asks questions. One person may see curiosity, while another sees annoyance. Yet beneath the questions is often a simple need to understand the world. The same principle continues into adulthood. Adults may hide their needs behind polished language, professional titles, or confident appearances, but those needs never disappear. They simply become more complicated. The silent observer learns to look beneath the behavior instead of stopping at the surface. One of the strongest human needs is the need for security. People want to feel safe, not only physically, but emotionally and financially as well. When this need feels threatened, behavior changes. Someone may become unusually cautious before making decisions. Another person may resist change, even when change could improve their life. Others may seek complete control over every detail because uncertainty makes them uncomfortable. Without recognizing the need for security, you might describe these people as stubborn or controlling. With understanding, you begin to see that fear is often guiding their choices. Another powerful need is belonging. Every person wants to feel accepted somewhere. This desire influences friendships, workplaces, families, and communities. It explains why people sometimes agree with opinions they secretly question or stay silent when they know something is wrong. The fear of being excluded can become stronger than the desire to be right. When you observe someone constantly adjusting their behavior depending on the people around them, ask yourself whether they are protecting their place within the group rather than expressing their true thoughts. Recognition also shapes behavior more than many people realize. Everyone appreciates feeling valued. Some people quietly hope their efforts will be noticed. Others openly seek praise and attention. Neither response automatically reflects vanity. Recognition reminds people that their work, time, and contribution matter. When someone feels invisible for too long, frustration often begins to appear in unexpected ways. They may become less motivated, more defensive, or unusually sensitive to criticism. Often, what looks like an attitude problem is actually a hunger to feel appreciated. Control is another need that quietly influences countless decisions. Life is unpredictable, and people naturally try to create order wherever they can. This explains why some individuals carefully plan every detail while others struggle when schedules suddenly change. Their desire for control is often an attempt to reduce uncertainty. As an observer, notice how people react when things don't go according to plan. Their response often reveals how strongly they depend on certainty to feel comfortable. Consider Tyler Bennett, a commercial pilot who was rebuilding his career after a difficult professional setback. He had recently joined a new airline and worked alongside another pilot who seemed unusually demanding during every pre-flight preparation. The colleague double-checked every checklist, questioned small details, and often requested additional reviews before takeoff. At first, Tyler privately assumed the man was simply trying to show authority, but instead of holding on to that assumption, he kept observing. He noticed that the behavior appeared only before flights involving unfamiliar routes or difficult weather conditions. During routine flights, the same pilot became relaxed, friendly, and easy to work with. Eventually, Tyler learned that his colleague had experienced a serious aviation incident years earlier. Since then, careful preparation had become his way of creating a sense of security. What first looked like arrogance was actually caution shaped by experience. Because Tyler looked beyond the behavior to the need beneath it, he replaced frustration with respect. Stories like this remind us that behavior often makes sense once we understand the need behind it. We don't always agree with how people respond to their needs, but understanding those needs allows us to respond more wisely. Instead of reacting emotionally, we begin asking better questions. This way of thinking also changes how you handle conflict. Imagine someone interrupting you repeatedly during a meeting. Rather than immediately deciding they are disrespectful, consider other possibilities. Perhaps they fear their ideas will be overlooked. Perhaps they are under pressure to prove themselves. Perhaps they simply learned this communication style in a fast-paced environment. These explanations do not excuse poor behavior, but they help you respond with greater clarity instead of unnecessary anger. The same principle applies to your own life. When you feel frustrated, discouraged, or impatient, pause and ask yourself what need is not being met. Are you looking for rest, appreciation, stability, growth? Honest answers to these questions often reveal far more than the emotion itself. Self-observation is just as valuable as observing others because it helps you understand your own decisions instead of acting on impulse. As you continue developing your observation skills, train yourself to ask one simple question whenever someone's behavior confuses you. What might this person need right now? You won't always know the answer, and that's perfectly fine. The purpose of the question is not to guess correctly every time. The purpose is to keep your mind open long enough to see beyond appearances. People are far more than the actions you witness in a single moment. Beneath every decision is a hope, a fear, a desire, or a need quietly shaping the direction they choose. Learn to recognize those invisible forces, and you will stop seeing human behavior as random. Instead, you will begin to see it as a meaningful expression of what people are trying to protect, achieve, or become. That understanding is one of the greatest gifts a silent observer can possess. Chapter 7. Separate, real confidence from perfect performance. Confidence is one of the most misunderstood qualities in human behavior. Many people assume it belongs to the loudest voice, the boldest personality, or the person who always seems certain. But genuine confidence is usually much quieter than that. It does not need constant attention, endless approval, or dramatic displays of strength. The silent observer learns to recognize the difference between someone who truly believes in themselves and someone who is working very hard to convince everyone else that they do. One of the easiest mistakes to make is confusing confidence with certainty. Truly confident people are comfortable saying, "I don't know." They are willing to ask questions, admit mistakes, and change their opinions when new information appears. They do not see learning as a threat to their identity. In contrast, someone who feels insecure may pretend to know everything because admitting uncertainty feels too risky. Their need to appear right becomes stronger than their desire to discover the truth. Watch how people respond when they are corrected. This moment often reveals far more than any prepared speech. A confident person may not enjoy criticism, but they usually listen before reacting. They ask questions, consider the feedback, and decide whether it is useful. Someone performing confidence often reacts differently. They become defensive, interrupt, blame others, or immediately explain why nothing was their fault. Their reaction is less about the correction itself and more about protecting the image they have created. Another clue appears in the way people seek attention. Genuine confidence does not require constant recognition because it grows from within. A person who feels secure in their abilities does not need every achievement to become a public announcement. They are comfortable letting their work speak for itself. On the other hand, someone who constantly searches for praise may not be arrogant at all. They may simply be relying on other people's approval to feel valuable. Without that approval, their confidence quickly begins to fade. Pay attention to how people treat those who cannot improve their status. This is one of the clearest windows into authentic character. It is easy to be respectful toward a supervisor, an important client, or someone with influence. It takes genuine confidence to show the same respect to a receptionist, a delivery driver, or a new employee. People who know their own worth rarely feel the need to prove it by making someone else feel smaller. Notice how confident people handle success as well. You might expect confidence to grow after an achievement, but truly confident individuals often remain remarkably steady. They celebrate their progress without believing it makes them more important than everyone else. Their identity is not built on a single victory. Likewise, when they experience failure, they do not immediately conclude that they are incapable. They separate the outcome from their sense of self. This balance allows them to keep learning without becoming discouraged or arrogant. Insecurity often hides behind perfection. Some people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to appear flawless because they believe mistakes will expose weakness. They carefully manage every word, every decision, and every impression. While this may look like confidence from a distance, it often creates constant pressure. Genuine confidence allows room for imperfection because it understands that growth is impossible without occasional failure. Another difference becomes visible during conversations. Confident people tend to listen more than they speak. They do not feel the need to dominate every discussion or have the final word. They ask thoughtful questions because they are genuinely interested in learning from others. Insecure people sometimes mistake talking for influence. They interrupt frequently, redirect conversations toward themselves, or struggle to let others receive attention. Of course, personality also plays a role. Some outgoing people naturally speak more than others. Once again, avoid judging one behavior alone. Look for consistent patterns instead. Observe how people react when someone else succeeds. This can be surprisingly revealing. A secure person is usually able to celebrate another person's achievement without feeling personally diminished. They understand that someone else's success does not reduce their own opportunities. In contrast, hidden insecurity may appear as jealousy, sarcasm, unnecessary competition, or the habit of minimizing another person's accomplishments. When a person constantly compares themselves to everyone around them, they often end up measuring their worth against circumstances they cannot control. There is an important lesson here for your own life as well. Ask yourself where your confidence comes from. Does it depend on compliments, achievements, job titles, or the opinions of others? Or does it come from knowing that you are willing to learn, improve, and remain true to your values? External success can strengthen confidence, but it cannot create lasting confidence by itself. If your identity rests entirely on outside approval, every criticism will feel like a personal attack. The silent observer also understands that confidence looks different in different people. One person expresses it through calm leadership, another expresses it through quiet consistency. Someone else shows confidence by patiently helping others without expecting recognition. Avoid creating one fixed image of what confidence should look like. Instead, pay attention to the underlying qualities: emotional stability, humility, curiosity, resilience, and respect. These traits appear again and again in people who possess genuine self-belief. As you continue observing those around you, resist the temptation to be impressed by appearances alone. Expensive clothes, polished speeches, impressive titles, or bold personalities can create a powerful first impression, but they do not always reveal true confidence. Look deeper. Notice how people respond when life becomes difficult, when they receive criticism, when they experience success, and when no one is watching. Over time, you will discover that real confidence is not a performance. It is a quiet strength that remains steady whether the spotlight is shining or not. Chapter 8. Let everyday habits expose hidden character. Character is rarely revealed during life's biggest moments. It is revealed in the ordinary moments that repeat every day. Grand speeches, public achievements, and impressive first impressions can capture attention, but they often tell only part of the story. Everyday habits are much harder to fake because they happen when people stop thinking about the image they want to create. The silent observer understands that if you want to know who someone truly is, watch what they repeatedly do when no special occasion calls for extraordinary behavior. Habits are powerful because they reflect choices made over and over again. A single act of kindness is meaningful, but a habit of kindness reveals character. Keeping one promise is admirable, but consistently honoring commitments, even when it is inconvenient, tells you far more about a person's reliability. Human behavior becomes predictable not because people never change, but because habits quietly shape the direction of their lives. Begin by noticing how people treat small responsibilities. Does someone return borrowed items without being reminded? Do they arrive prepared for meetings? Do they clean up after themselves without expecting praise? These actions may seem too ordinary to matter, but they reveal something important. People who take small responsibilities seriously are often the same people who can be trusted with larger ones. Integrity is usually built through countless small decisions rather than one dramatic act. Pay attention to punctuality, but don't reduce it to a simple measure of respect. Life happens. Traffic, emergencies, and unexpected situations affect everyone. Instead, observe the overall pattern. Does the person communicate when they will be late? Do they make an effort to respect other people's time, or do they repeatedly expect others to adjust around their schedule? Their consistent attitude toward time often reflects how they view responsibility and consideration. Another revealing habit is the way people respond to inconvenience. Anyone can remain pleasant when everything is going according to plan. The real test comes when plans suddenly change. Watch how someone reacts when a restaurant gets an order wrong, when a meeting is delayed, or when technology stops working. Some people immediately become impatient and blame everyone around them. Others pause, adapt, and search for solutions. These everyday frustrations create valuable opportunities to observe emotional maturity. Notice how people speak about others when those people are not present. This habit reveals more than many realize. Someone who constantly criticizes friends, co-workers, or family members behind their backs may eventually do the same to anyone who is listening. On the other hand, a person who speaks fairly about others, even during disagreements, often values respect more than temporary satisfaction. You do not have to expect perfection, but repeated patterns of gossip or generosity become meaningful over time. Curiosity is another habit worth observing. Some people approach life with a desire to learn. They ask thoughtful questions, listen carefully, and remain open to new perspectives. Others quickly dismiss unfamiliar ideas because they prefer certainty over growth. Neither person may announce these attitudes openly, yet their daily conversations quietly reveal them. A curious mind often leads to personal growth because it remains willing to explore instead of pretending to know everything. Consider Madeline Cross, a veterinarian who was preparing to expand her animal clinic by hiring another veterinary assistant. The interviews went well, and several candidates had impressive qualifications. Instead of making her decision immediately, Madeline paid attention to what happened before and after the interviews. She noticed how each applicant greeted the receptionist, whether they thanked the office staff, and how they behaved while waiting in the lobby. One candidate spoke confidently during the interview, but ignored a nervous pet owner struggling to calm an anxious dog. Another candidate quietly knelt beside the frightened animal, comforting it without anyone asking. That small act lasted less than a minute, yet it reflected the compassion and initiative Madeline hoped to find. The second candidate eventually became one of the most trusted members of the clinic. The decision wasn't based on polished answers alone. It was based on a habit of caring that appeared naturally in an ordinary moment. This story reminds us that small actions often carry greater weight than impressive performances. When people are not trying to impress anyone, their habits begin speaking for them. That is why patient observation is so valuable. It allows you to see beyond rehearsed behavior and into the routines that shape everyday life. As you observe others, remember to apply the same attention to yourself. Your habits tell the story of the person you are becoming. The promises you keep, the way you manage your time, the respect you show to strangers, and the consistency with which you pursue your goals all reveal your character more honestly than your intentions ever could. Every repeated action becomes another sentence in the story your life is telling. There is also wisdom in avoiding quick conclusions. One thoughtful gesture does not automatically define someone's character, just as one mistake does not erase years of integrity. Continue looking for patterns. Do kindness, honesty, patience, and responsibility appear consistently? Or do they surface only when they are convenient? Character becomes clearer the longer you observe. As your ability to notice habits grows, you will begin seeing people differently. You will rely less on charm and more on consistency. You will value steady actions more than impressive promises. And you will realize that the strongest evidence of character is rarely found in extraordinary moments. It is quietly built through ordinary choices, repeated day after day, until those choices become the person someone truly is. Chapter 9. Predict people's next move before they make it. One of the greatest advantages of becoming a silent observer is that you begin noticing where people's behavior is leading. You are no longer surprised by every reaction because you have learned to recognize the patterns that usually come before it. This is not about reading minds or making impossible predictions. It is about understanding that human behavior follows recognizable paths. When you observe carefully, you can often anticipate what someone is likely to do next, not because you know the future, but because you understand the habits, emotions, and motivations that shape their decisions. Think about someone who always avoids difficult conversations. The first few times, it may seem like coincidence, but after seeing the same pattern repeatedly, you can reasonably expect that the next uncomfortable discussion will probably be avoided as well. Likewise, someone who consistently prepares thoroughly before every challenge is likely to approach the next opportunity with the same level of discipline. People often believe their actions are unpredictable, yet their repeated choices quietly create a map of future behavior. The key is learning to look for direction instead of isolated events. Every habit points somewhere. A person who consistently accepts responsibility after making mistakes is building trust. A person who repeatedly blames others is building conflict. Someone who invests time in learning new skills is moving toward growth. Another who constantly delays important decisions may be moving toward missed opportunities. When you observe the direction rather than the single step, future actions become much easier to anticipate. Pay close attention to emotional patterns. Emotions influence decisions long before logic catches up. Someone who has been growing increasingly frustrated over several weeks may eventually express that frustration in ways that surprise everyone else, but not you, because you notice the gradual changes. Likewise, a person who has quietly become more confident through repeated successes will often begin taking larger opportunities without announcing their intentions first. Emotions rarely change overnight. They usually build slowly until they become visible through action. Another clue lies in priorities. People naturally move toward what they value most. Listen carefully to what they repeatedly talk about, where they spend their time, and what they consistently protect. A person who frequently speaks about improving their health and steadily builds healthy habits is likely to continue making decisions that support that goal. Someone who constantly says family comes first, but repeatedly sacrifices family for work may be revealing a different set of priorities than their words suggest. Actions almost always predict future actions more accurately than promises do. Watch how people respond under pressure, because pressure often reveals the behaviors they trust most. Some become more organized, others withdraw. Some seek advice, while others insist on handling everything alone. Once you understand how someone naturally reacts during stressful situations, you can often predict how they will respond the next time pressure appears. This knowledge allows you to communicate more effectively because you stop expecting people to behave differently without first changing the habits that guide them. Observation also helps you recognize opportunities before others do. Imagine working with a colleague who has quietly become more engaged in meetings, volunteers for additional responsibilities, and begins asking thoughtful questions about leadership. These small changes may suggest that the person is preparing for greater responsibility long before they receive a promotion. Instead of being surprised when they advance, you understand that their daily behavior had been pointing in that direction all along. It is important, however, to avoid treating your observations as absolute certainty. Human beings always have the ability to change. A person who has acted one way for years can decide to take a completely different path. The purpose of observation is not to place people into permanent categories. It is to understand probabilities, not guarantees. Stay open to new evidence. Good observers adjust their understanding whenever consistent new patterns begin to appear. Another mistake to avoid is predicting behavior based on your own personality. People do not always react the way you would. They respond according to their own experiences, values, fears, and goals. If you assume everyone thinks like you, your predictions will often be wrong. Instead, ask yourself, given everything I have observed about this person, what choice is most consistent with who they are? This question keeps your attention focused on the individual rather than on yourself. The same principle can improve your own decision-making. If your current habits continue unchanged, where will they lead you? Every repeated action is quietly predicting your future. If you consistently read, practice new skills, and keep your commitments, your future will likely reflect those habits. If you regularly procrastinate, avoid difficult conversations, or ignore important responsibilities, those choices will also shape what comes next. Observation is not only about understanding others, it is also about recognizing the future you are creating through your own behavior. As you continue this journey, begin noticing direction instead of isolated moments. Ask yourself what today's actions suggest about tomorrow. Look for repeated habits, emotional trends, and consistent priorities. Resist the urge to make dramatic conclusions after one event, but don't ignore the quiet evidence that appears day after day. Human behavior leaves clues long before important decisions are made. The silent observer is rarely caught off guard because they pay attention to the path people are already walking. They understand that the future is often hidden inside today's repeated choices. Learn to recognize those choices, and you will not only understand people more clearly, you will often see their next step before they take it. Chapter 10. Read the invisible rules inside every relationship. No relationship is built on words alone, whether it is a friendship, a marriage, a family bond, or a professional partnership. Every relationship develops its own unspoken rules. These rules are rarely discussed, yet they influence almost every interaction. They determine who usually speaks first, who makes decisions, who offers support, who avoids conflict, and who quietly carries responsibility. If you want to understand people more deeply, don't observe them only as individuals. Observe how they change when they are with someone else. Relationships reveal sides of people that you may never see when they are alone. A confident manager may become quiet around a demanding parent. A reserved employee may become energetic when working with a trusted teammate. A person who appears serious in public may become playful around close friends. None of these versions are fake. They simply reflect the different roles people naturally step into depending on the relationship. The silent observer understands that human behavior is shaped not only by personality but also by connection. One of the first things to notice is balance. Healthy relationships usually involve a natural exchange. Both people contribute in different ways, but neither consistently carries the entire relationship alone. They listen to each other, show appreciation, and adjust when circumstances change. In unhealthy relationships, balance often disappears. One person may constantly give while the other only receives. One may always apologize while the other rarely accepts responsibility. These patterns are not always obvious at first, but repeated observation makes them easier to recognize. Pay attention to how people respond to each other's success. Genuine support is one of the strongest signs of a healthy relationship. When someone shares good news, does the other person celebrate with sincere enthusiasm, or do they quickly shift the conversation back to themselves? Do they encourage growth, or do they quietly become uncomfortable when someone else begins succeeding? Moments of success often reveal hidden feelings that everyday conversations never expose. Conflict is another valuable window into relationships. Every strong relationship experiences disagreements. The difference lies in how those disagreements are handled. Observe whether people attack each other or focus on solving the problem. Notice whether they listen, interrupt, dismiss, or genuinely try to understand. Some couples, friends, and co-workers disagree respectfully because trust already exists beneath the conflict. Others avoid disagreement entirely, allowing resentment to grow quietly over time. Silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes it simply means important conversations are being postponed. Another invisible rule appears in the way people share attention. During conversations, notice who finishes the other person's sentences, who interrupts regularly, and who patiently waits for others to speak. These habits reveal levels of respect that words alone cannot express. Someone may frequently say, "I value your opinion," but if they rarely allow the other person to complete a sentence, their behavior tells a different story. Consistency between words and actions remains one of the most reliable guides in observation. Trust also leaves visible traces. In relationships built on trust, people often relax. They speak more naturally, admit mistakes without fear, and express disagreement without worrying that the relationship will immediately fall apart. Where trust is weak, conversations may feel carefully controlled. People measure every word, hide concerns, or avoid honesty because they fear judgment or conflict. You cannot always see trust directly, but you can often recognize its presence through the freedom people feel when they are together. Consider Connor Hayes, a film editor who had recently been promoted to lead a creative team working on a major documentary project. Everyone on the team was talented, and meetings were usually polite. Yet Connor sensed that progress was slower than expected. Instead of focusing only on the discussions, he began observing the interactions before and after the meetings. He noticed that two experienced editors frequently exchanged quick glances before one of them spoke. During breaks, younger team members often waited for those two to react before offering their own ideas. No one openly disagreed, but an unspoken hierarchy had quietly formed. Connor realized that several valuable voices were staying silent, not because they lacked confidence, but because they believed their opinions carried less weight. Rather than confronting the issue directly, Connor changed the meeting structure. He invited each person to share ideas before open discussion began. Within a few weeks, the team produced more creative solutions, and collaboration became noticeably stronger. The breakthrough came because Connor observed the invisible relationship dynamics instead of listening only to the words. This example reminds us that relationships are full of silent signals. Influence is often expressed through subtle habits rather than obvious authority. Once you begin noticing these patterns, you understand not only what people say to each other, but also how they shape one another's behavior. As you observe the relationships around you, resist the temptation to judge them too quickly. Every relationship has its own history, challenges, and ways of communicating. Instead of deciding who is right or wrong, ask yourself what invisible rules seem to guide their interactions. Who naturally leads? Who offers comfort? Who seeks approval? Who creates calm during stressful moments? These observations will help you understand the relationship without reducing it to simple labels. The same awareness can improve your own relationships. Consider the unspoken rules you have created with family, friends, or co-workers. Are they built on respect, honesty, and trust? Or have unhealthy habits quietly become normal? Observation gives you the opportunity to strengthen relationships because it helps you recognize patterns before they become permanent. Every relationship speaks a silent language. It is written through habits, respect, shared experiences, and repeated choices rather than dramatic conversations. Learn to read that language patiently, and you will begin seeing connections that others overlook. In doing so, you will understand not just individual people, but the invisible forces that bring them together or quietly push them apart. Chapter 11. Notice conflict. While everyone else sees calm, conflict rarely begins with raised voices or angry words. By the time people start arguing, the real conflict has often been growing quietly for days, weeks, or even months. Like a small crack in a wall, it begins almost unnoticed. Then, with enough pressure, it becomes impossible to ignore. The silent observer understands that if you want to recognize conflict, you must learn to notice the small changes that appear long before the disagreement becomes obvious. One of the earliest signs of conflict is a change in communication. Someone who once responded with warmth may suddenly become brief and distant. A co-worker who normally shares ideas freely may begin remaining silent during meetings. A friend who usually calls every weekend may slowly stop reaching out. These changes do not automatically mean conflict exists, but they deserve your attention. Human behavior often changes before people are ready to explain why. Another important clue is emotional withdrawal. Not everyone expresses frustration through arguments. Some people do the opposite. They become quieter, less engaged, and emotionally unavailable. Instead of discussing problems, they begin avoiding conversations altogether. This kind of silence can be easy to misunderstand because it doesn't create immediate drama. Yet, emotional distance often grows when concerns remain unspoken for too long. If you only watch for loud disagreements, you may completely miss the quieter forms of conflict. Pay attention to changes in patience as well. Everyone has moments of irritation, especially during stressful periods. But when a normally patient person begins reacting strongly to small inconveniences, something deeper may be happening. They may not actually be upset about the delayed meeting, the misplaced document, or the forgotten phone call. Those small events simply become the place where larger frustrations finally appear. Skilled observers recognize that intense reactions are sometimes connected to pressures that have nothing to do with the situation itself. Body language also changes during growing conflict. People may begin turning their bodies away during conversations, folding into themselves, reducing eye contact, or creating more physical distance than usual. Others become unusually rigid, crossing their arms or keeping their movements controlled. These behaviors should never be treated as proof of conflict on their own, but when several changes appear together and continue over time, they often suggest that emotional comfort has decreased. Listen carefully to the language people begin using. Conflict often changes the words people choose. Instead of saying, "We should solve this," someone may start saying, "You always do this," or "You never listen." Notice the shift. Conversations move away from solving a problem and toward assigning blame. Once people begin describing each other instead of discussing the issue, the disagreement usually becomes more personal. Recognizing this change early gives you an opportunity to redirect the conversation before resentment grows stronger. Another subtle sign is the disappearance of curiosity. Healthy conversations include questions. People want to understand each other's perspective, even when they disagree. As conflict grows, curiosity often fades. Instead of asking, "Can you help me understand?" people begin assuming they already know the other person's intentions. They stop seeking clarity and start filling the gaps with their own interpretations. Unfortunately, those interpretations are often influenced by emotion rather than fact. One habit that can protect you from unnecessary conflict is refusing to react to the first emotional moment you witness. Imagine someone speaking sharply to you after a difficult day. Your first instinct may be to respond with equal intensity, but the silent observer pauses. Instead of reacting immediately, they ask themselves whether this response fits the person's usual behavior. If it doesn't, perhaps something else is happening beneath the surface. That brief pause often prevents small misunderstandings from becoming larger problems. It is also important to notice recurring tension between the same people. Two co-workers may repeatedly interrupt one another. Family members may avoid sitting together during gatherings. Friends may slowly stop sharing personal thoughts with each other. These repeated patterns suggest that unresolved issues may already exist. You do not need to involve yourself in every disagreement, but recognizing these dynamics helps you better understand the emotional environment around you. At the same time, remember that not every disagreement is harmful. In fact, healthy conflict can strengthen relationships when handled with honesty and respect. People grow by discussing different ideas, expressing concerns, and solving problems together. The goal is not to eliminate disagreement, but to recognize when it begins moving away from understanding and toward resentment. Observing this shift allows you to encourage calmer conversations before emotions become too difficult to manage. The same awareness should be directed inward. Learn to notice the early signs of conflict within yourself. Perhaps you become unusually impatient, replay conversations in your mind, or avoid someone you normally enjoy being around. These behaviors are valuable signals. Instead of ignoring them, become curious about what they are trying to tell you. The sooner you understand your own emotions, the less likely they are to control your actions. As you continue developing your observation skills, remember that peace is not always the absence of visible conflict. Sometimes the room appears calm, while disappointment, frustration, or misunderstanding quietly grows beneath the surface. Your ability to notice these early signals is not meant to make you suspicious of everyone around you. It is meant to make you wiser, more patient, and more thoughtful in the way you respond. The best observers do not wait for relationships to break before paying attention. They notice the quiet changes early enough to protect understanding before conflict ever has the chance to take control. Chapter 12. Observe without judging and understand more. The greatest obstacle to understanding people is not a lack of intelligence. It is the habit of judging too quickly. The moment you decide you already know why someone acted a certain way, your curiosity disappears. Your mind stops observing and starts defending its conclusion. That is why the silent observer develops a rare discipline. They delay judgment long enough to let the full picture appear. This does not mean they ignore harmful behavior or refuse to make decisions. It simply means they understand that accurate observation always comes before meaningful conclusions. Think about how often first impressions shape the rest of an interaction. Someone arrives late and you assume they are irresponsible. Another person speaks very little and you assume they are unfriendly. A co-worker declines an invitation and you conclude they don't enjoy being around the team. Later you discover completely different explanations. The person who arrived late stopped to help someone with a flat tire. The quiet co-worker was carefully listening before speaking. The colleague who declined the invitation had been caring for an ill family member. The facts changed because your understanding grew. Observation protects you from the mistakes created by incomplete information. One of the best habits you can develop is replacing conclusions with possibilities. Instead of thinking, "This person is rude," try asking, "What else could explain this behavior?" That simple question keeps your mind open. It encourages you to gather more information instead of forcing every situation into your first assumption. Curiosity creates better observers because it values discovery more than certainty. This approach also changes the way you respond to mistakes. Imagine someone forgetting an important meeting. A judgmental mind immediately labels them as careless. An observant mind notices the mistake, but also pays attention to the person's overall pattern. Is this unusual for them? Have they been under unusual pressure lately? Have they consistently been dependable until now? Looking at the larger picture often leads to wiser responses. You still address the problem, but you do so with fairness instead of frustration. Another important lesson is learning to separate behavior from identity. People make poor decisions, they lose patience, speak carelessly, and act emotionally. But one poor decision does not define an entire person. If you attach permanent labels to temporary behavior, you stop seeing the possibility of growth. The silent observer believes people are capable of change because they understand that behavior is influenced by circumstances, habits, emotions, and choices that can all evolve over time. This way of observing requires emotional discipline. If someone disappoints you, your emotions naturally encourage you to interpret everything they do through that disappointment. Suddenly, neutral actions begin looking negative because your feelings have colored your perception. Skilled observers recognize this tendency within themselves. Before evaluating another person's behavior, they first ask whether their own emotions might be influencing what they see. Self-awareness makes observation more accurate because it reduces the influence of personal bias. Consider Olivia Harper, a marine biologist leading a research expedition along the Atlantic coast. Her team included scientists, technicians, and graduate students, all working under demanding conditions. During the first week, Olivia noticed that one young researcher rarely participated in group discussions. While others exchanged ideas enthusiastically, he remained quiet and often stood near the back of the room. Some team members quietly assumed he lacked confidence or wasn't fully prepared. Olivia chose not to accept that conclusion. Instead, she continued observing. She noticed that after each meeting, he stayed behind reviewing data and often sent thoughtful written suggestions later in the evening. During one-on-one conversations, he explained his ideas clearly and confidently. Olivia realized he wasn't avoiding participation because he lacked knowledge. He simply preferred careful reflection before speaking. She adjusted the team's meeting structure by giving everyone a few minutes to organize their thoughts before discussion began. Almost immediately, his ideas began contributing to major breakthroughs, and other quieter team members became more engaged as well. Olivia's patience prevented a talented researcher from being misunderstood simply because his communication style differed from everyone else's. This story reminds us that judgment is often based on speed, while understanding is built through patience. If Olivia had accepted the first impression, she might have overlooked one of the most valuable voices on her team. Instead, she allowed observation to replace assumption, and everyone benefited from the result. There is another reason to avoid quick judgment. The way you see others often influences how they behave around you. People tend to relax when they feel understood. They become more honest, more cooperative, and more willing to share their thoughts. On the other hand, when they feel constantly judged, they begin protecting themselves. They speak less freely, hide mistakes, and become cautious in your presence. By approaching people with curiosity instead of criticism, you create an environment where genuine behavior naturally appears. Practice observing with quiet patience every day. Watch without rushing to label. Listen without preparing a verdict. Notice patterns before forming opinions. You don't have to excuse poor behavior, ignore warning signs, or abandon good judgment. You simply need to allow understanding to come first. Decisions made after careful observation are almost always wiser than decisions made after quick assumptions. As your journey as a silent observer continues, you will discover that the greatest reward is not becoming better at reading other people. It is becoming a person who responds with greater wisdom, fairness, and empathy. When you learn to observe without judging, you see people more clearly, communicate more effectively, and build stronger relationships. And in a world where so many people rush to conclusions, your patience will become one of your greatest strengths. Chapter 13. Become the person who understands everyone. Throughout this audiobook, you have learned how to notice what many people overlook. You have discovered how body language, tone of voice, habits, emotions, motivations, and relationships quietly reveal who people are. But these skills are not the final destination. They are simply tools. The real goal is to become someone who understands people more deeply. Understanding is far more powerful than simply observing because it changes the way you respond. It turns knowledge into wisdom. There is a common belief that the person with the strongest influence is the one who speaks the most convincingly. In reality, influence often begins with understanding. People naturally trust those who make them feel seen and heard. They are more willing to open up to someone who listens carefully than to someone who constantly offers advice. This is why the silent observer often becomes the person others feel comfortable talking to. They create space instead of competition. They seek clarity instead of attention. One of the greatest gifts you can offer another person is your full attention. In a world filled with distractions, that gift has become surprisingly rare. Too often, conversations are interrupted by phones, wandering thoughts, or the desire to respond before the other person has finished speaking. But when someone realizes that you are fully present, something changes. They begin sharing more honestly. They relax. They stop feeling as though they must defend every word. Your attention quietly tells them, what you are saying matters. Understanding people also requires accepting that no one fits neatly into simple categories. Someone can be confident at work and uncertain at home. A cheerful friend may quietly struggle with loneliness. A disciplined professional may still carry fears they never discuss. Human beings are wonderfully complex. The silent observer resists the temptation to reduce people to one label because they understand that every person carries experiences that cannot be seen at first glance. Another important habit is learning to ask better questions. Many conversations remain shallow because people ask questions that invite short answers. Instead of asking only, "How are you?" try asking, "What has been the most interesting part of your week?" or "What are you looking forward to these days?" Questions like these encourage people to share thoughts instead of routines. They create opportunities for genuine understanding rather than predictable conversation. At the same time, remember that understanding does not mean agreeing with everyone. You can understand why someone behaves a certain way while still disagreeing with their choices. Observation helps explain behavior. It does not excuse harmful actions. This distinction is important because it allows you to remain compassionate without abandoning your values. You can respond with kindness while still setting healthy boundaries when necessary. As your understanding grows, you will also become more patient. Instead of expecting instant answers, you will recognize that trust develops over time. Some people need many conversations before they feel comfortable revealing what truly matters to them. Others express themselves slowly because they are still trying to understand their own thoughts. Your willingness to wait instead of rushing creates stronger relationships because people feel accepted rather than pressured. Humility is another quality that strengthens understanding. No matter how skilled you become at observing people, you will never know everything about another person's life. There will always be experiences you cannot see, memories you cannot access, and struggles that remain private. This awareness keeps your observation grounded. Instead of saying, "I know exactly who this person is," you begin saying, "I understand a little more today than I did yesterday." That mindset leaves room for continual learning. Understanding others also improves your understanding of yourself. As you notice emotional patterns in people around you, you begin recognizing similar patterns within your own life. You become more aware of your reactions, your assumptions, and your habits. You notice when fear influences your decisions, when pride affects your conversations, or when impatience prevents you from truly listening. Observation becomes a mirror as much as it becomes a window. One of the quiet rewards of becoming an observer is that you stop needing to prove yourself so often. You become less interested in winning every conversation and more interested in learning from it. Instead of trying to impress people with your knowledge, you become curious about their experiences. This shift changes the quality of your relationships because people feel respected rather than evaluated. They remember how you made them feel, not how many words you spoke. Imagine carrying this mindset into every area of your life. At work, you understand your colleagues before offering solutions. At home, you listen to your family with patience instead of assumption. With friends, you notice when someone needs encouragement before they ask for it. Even with strangers, you approach each interaction with the belief that there is always more to learn than what first appears. These small changes create a life filled with stronger connections and fewer misunderstandings. As this chapter comes to an end, remember that becoming someone who understands everyone is not about possessing perfect insight. It is about developing a lifelong habit of paying attention with kindness. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to learn. Every relationship becomes a chance to grow in wisdom. Every person becomes a reminder that beneath every action is a story waiting to be understood. The silent observer is not remembered for clever words or dramatic opinions. They are remembered because people feel genuinely understood in their presence. And that may be one of the rarest and most valuable qualities anyone can develop. Chapter 14. Make silent observation your greatest lifelong advantage. Every skill becomes valuable only when it becomes a habit. You can read books about observation, listen to ideas about human behavior, and recognize patterns for a while, but lasting change happens only when these lessons become part of the way you naturally move through life. The goal has never been to turn you into someone who analyzes every gesture or questions every conversation. The goal is much simpler. It is to help you become more aware, more patient, and more understanding every single day. By now you have seen that people reveal themselves gradually. Their words matter, but so do their actions. Their expressions matter, but so do their habits. Their confidence, fears, motivations, relationships, and emotional patterns all contribute to the story they are telling. When you stop relying on first impressions and begin paying attention to these deeper signals, you no longer react to the surface, you respond to the person beneath it. One of the greatest benefits of silent observation is better judgment. Good judgment is not about making faster decisions. It is about making wiser ones. The more carefully you observe before acting, the fewer unnecessary mistakes you make. You become less likely to trust someone simply because they are charming. You become less likely to reject someone simply because they are quiet. Instead, you allow consistency, character, and repeated behavior to guide your understanding. Time becomes one of your greatest teachers because it reveals what first impressions cannot. Observation also changes the quality of your relationships. When people feel understood, they naturally become more comfortable around you. They speak more honestly because they sense they are not being rushed or judged. They know you are listening to understand rather than listening to reply. This creates trust, and trust is the foundation of every meaningful relationship. Whether you are speaking with a friend, a family member, a co-worker, or someone you have just met, your ability to truly observe will help you connect in ways that words alone never could. There is another advantage that often goes unnoticed. Observation protects you from emotional impulsiveness. When you train yourself to pause before reacting, you give yourself the opportunity to see situations more clearly. Someone's harsh words no longer control your emotions immediately because you have learned to ask what might have caused them. A disappointing conversation no longer forces you into instant conclusions because you recognize that one moment rarely tells the whole story. This pause creates emotional freedom. Instead of being controlled by every situation, you become someone who responds thoughtfully. As your awareness grows, you will begin noticing opportunities that once escaped your attention. You will recognize when someone needs encouragement before they ask for it. You will notice potential partnerships built on trust instead of appearance. You will identify habits that deserve admiration and patterns that deserve caution. These observations will quietly improve your decisions at work, strengthen your friendships, deepen your family relationships, and help you avoid misunderstandings that once seemed unavoidable. At the same time, remember that observation should never become suspicion. There is an important difference between paying attention and constantly searching for hidden motives. If you begin assuming that every smile hides deception or every pause hides dishonesty, observation loses its purpose. The silent observer approaches people with openness, not fear. They understand that most people are not trying to deceive others. They are simply doing their best while carrying responsibilities, hopes, fears, and struggles that may never be visible on the surface. Keep practicing the habits you have developed throughout this journey. Slow your mind before entering conversations. Watch for patterns instead of isolated moments. Listen to the emotions behind the words. Look for the needs driving behavior. Separate genuine confidence from performance. Notice character through everyday habits. Recognize conflict before it grows. Observe with curiosity instead of judgment. These habits reinforce one another until observation becomes as natural as breathing. Never forget to observe yourself with the same honesty you offer others. Notice how you react under pressure. Pay attention to the habits shaping your own character. Listen to the emotions behind your own decisions. Ask yourself whether your actions consistently reflect the values you hope to live by. Self-observation is not self-criticism. It is the practice of becoming more aware so you can continue growing. The better you understand yourself, the more accurately and compassionately you will understand everyone else. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that understanding people is not about gaining control over them. It is about learning to live with greater wisdom. Every person you meet has a story you cannot fully see. Every conversation offers an opportunity to learn something new about human nature. Every day gives you another chance to replace assumption with curiosity and reaction with understanding. As you leave this audiobook, carry these lessons into ordinary life. Practice them while waiting in line, during conversations at work, over dinner with your family, and in moments when emotions begin to rise. You do not need special situations to become a better observer. Everyday life provides endless opportunities to strengthen this skill. The quietest person in the room is not always the one with the least influence. Very often they are the one paying the closest attention. They notice what others miss. They understand before they respond. They remain calm while others rush to conclusions. Over time, this way of living creates stronger relationships, wiser decisions, deeper empathy, and greater confidence. Make silent observation your lifelong advantage, and you will discover that the more carefully you learn to understand people, the more wisely you will learn to live. Conclusion. Every meaningful journey changes the way you see the world. This one has changed the way you see people. When you first began listening, reading people may have sounded like a mysterious ability possessed by only a few, but now you know the truth. It is not magic, and it is not guesswork. It is the result of patient attention. It is the willingness to slow down, to notice what others overlook, and to replace assumptions with understanding. Throughout this audiobook, you have learned that people are constantly communicating. Their posture, their habits, their tone of voice, their reactions under pressure, the relationships they build, and the choices they repeat all tell a story. Words are only one part of that story. Often the most important messages are the ones that are never spoken aloud. But perhaps the greatest lesson is that observation is not about becoming more suspicious. It is about becoming more compassionate. The more carefully you observe people, the more you realize that everyone is carrying something invisible. Some carry hope, others carry fear, some are quietly rebuilding their confidence, others are hiding disappointment behind a smile. Many people are simply trying to do their best while facing challenges that no one else can see. When you understand this, patience begins to replace judgment, and empathy begins to replace criticism. This new way of seeing people also transforms the way you see yourself. You become more aware of your own emotions before they control your actions. You begin recognizing your habits, your patterns, and the needs that quietly influence your decisions. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause. Instead of assuming, you become curious. Instead of rushing toward conclusions, you allow understanding to grow. That is where real wisdom begins. Remember that becoming a silent observer does not mean becoming silent in every conversation. It means becoming intentional. Speak when your words add value. Listen when listening creates understanding. Observe before reacting. Think before judging. The more consistently you practice these habits, the more natural they will become. There will still be moments when you misunderstand someone. There will be times when people surprise you, disappoint you, or challenge everything you thought you understood. That is part of being human. Observation does not make you perfect. It simply helps you become more thoughtful with every experience. Each conversation becomes another opportunity to learn instead of another opportunity to prove yourself right. As you move forward, let every interaction become part of your education. Notice how people respond during success and failure. Watch how habits shape character over time. Listen for emotions hidden beneath confident words. Pay attention to kindness that asks for no recognition. Observe consistency more than charm, actions more than promises, and patterns more than isolated moments. At the same time, continue protecting your own character. Use these skills to build trust, strengthen relationships, encourage others, and make wiser decisions. Never use them to manipulate, embarrass, or gain unfair advantage. The highest purpose of understanding human behavior is not control, it is connection. Imagine how different your life could become if every conversation left people feeling heard instead of judged. Imagine making decisions based on careful observation instead of quick assumptions. Imagine remaining calm when others become emotional because you understand what may be happening beneath the surface. These are not impossible goals. They are the natural result of practicing the principles you have learned throughout this audiobook. Years from now, people may never remember every word you spoke. They may not remember every opinion you shared or every piece of advice you offered, but they will remember how they felt in your presence. They will remember whether you truly listened, whether you understood before responding, and whether they felt respected and valued. That is the quiet power of the silent observer. So walk into the world with open eyes, a calm mind, and a patient heart. Let curiosity guide your conversations. Let wisdom shape your responses. Let compassion influence your judgments. Continue learning from every person you meet, because every life has something to teach you. The world has always been speaking a silent language. Now you know how to hear it. Now you know how to see it. And from this day forward, you can choose to become the person who understands before speaking, observes before judging, and connects before concluding. That quiet ability will become one of the greatest strengths you will ever possess.